Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr. Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Success in Africa podcast, brought to you in part by BCA Leadership and BCA Online. My name is Dr. Modupe Taylor Pierce, and I am a scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I have been doing this for 3 decades with a particular focus on people based in Africa, experiencing success in Africa. And in this podcast, I share their stories, I share the lessons that they have learned so that you can be successful. That's why we do this podcast. We do it because I have a vision for Africa. I have a vision of Africa becoming a high-income continent by the year 2040. And for that to happen, I need you and every other African to become successful. So, if you like what you hear in any of these episodes, please feel free to click the like button and subscribe. Tell others about it. This podcast is brought to you by BCA Online, the one-stop shop for mastering leadership. BCA Online is free. You can get on it at no cost at all. And it contains a plethora of knowledge and insights and information that you need in order to become successful. You can connect with other leaders there. The link is on the screen, so just click on that and join in. I'm so excited about today's episode because for today's episode is an interview between a lady by the name of Mook, who happens to be the CEO of the International Coaching Federation. And she's interviewing me and asking a bit about my journey. The reason for the interview is because about 4 months ago, sometime in November, both Magda and I were selected by Thinkers 50 as global coaching legends. This is a singular honor. Some of the other global coaching legends include the Professor Ram Charan. It includes Coach Mike Krzyzewski and a couple of other well-known people. So this is no small honor. And I personally dedicate this honor to all of the amazing leadership coaches in Africa who individually and collectively are transforming the performance of leaders in Africa and generating a movement of better leadership that you and others will benefit from. So, without further ado, let me direct your attention to the interview. I hope you will learn something about being successful in Africa from this interview.
Hi, I am very excited of having our guest today, and you can see him, and he is Modupe Taylor Pierce. Modupe and I had a very unique experience together, shared together. Last year, both of us were recognized in the cohort of 2025 of Coaching Legends. Little silly anecdote when I said to one of my colleagues saying like it makes me feel a little old. She said, "Hey, listen, you become a legend either by dying young or being a little old." And I'm like, okay, I'm actually okay with that. So anyway, I am very excited to welcome Modupe to our time together today.
Thank you so much, Magda. And certainly I agree with you. Given those two options, I'll go with old.
And all this negotiable. Anyway, I am really very, very excited about speaking to you, Modupe, because you have very one may say, unusual background, and your choice of where you work and what you do maybe it's not as unusual for people who know your background, but it may not be the most obvious trajectory. For those who do not know, Dr. Taylor Pierce is actually one of the very few Africans who graduated from West Point in the United States. And then you continue your education here in the Western Hemisphere with Cornell and then with Capella University. So I have to ask, what possessed you to go to West Point?
Great question, Magda. Um, I think it was a case of a young boy in Sierra Leone, West Africa, what is essentially a poor third world country, who was presented with an opportunity. Um, in those days, in the mid to late 80s, when you are presented with what is essentially an opportunity to get an education in a prestigious institution on a scholarship, it is difficult to turn it down. I started off wanting to be a pilot, so I would go to the U.S. Embassy Library and would look at schools that had pilot training and would train you for that, because we didn't have any pilot schools in Sierra Leone, or to my knowledge anywhere near Sierra Leone. And that's how I came to the attention of some of the embassy authorities. I also came to their further attention because I won, on behalf of my high school, an inter-school impromptu speech giving and debating competition. And then thirdly, our volleyball and basketball team won an inter-secondary school competition. And unbeknownst to me, they were looking for what West Point would call scholar athletes. This opportunity. So it was brought to my attention. I was informed that yes, it's a military scholarship, but they're looking for young people who have that capacity. And my first answer was no, I'm not interested. And the reason was because they didn't have a pilot school. But my parents at the time were missionaries in Kenya. And so I was living with my aunt and uncle, and my aunt was very much a drill sergeant in how.
You were well prepared.
So when my aunt heard about this, which she didn't hear from me, she heard from somebody else. And then she said, "What did he say? Tell me about it." And this person said, "Well, he's not interested." And my aunt's words to this person at the embassy was, "He lives with me. He's under my care. I let him know what he's interested in."
Yeah, you very well prepared.
So about 24 hours later, I went back to the embassy and said, "Yes, I'm interested." And the preparation started. It was still a global competition. We had to take a number of exams. We were pitted against people from other countries. But by the grace of God, I was accepted. And that's how I ended up being the first Sierra Leonean to ever
First Sierra Leonean. All right. Congratulations. Yeah, because I was thinking about it, young men at that point, obviously, being asked to leave what they know as their country, as their culture, and go somewhere completely different, even with Auntie's preparation to the military school, no less. That is the act of courage and, I dare say, leadership already then in that early age. And yet your great story about your aunt, yeah, we all need in our life those people who nudge us or frankly push us occasionally to not miss on the opportunity that is presented to us, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, I was just reading about 30 minutes ago a quote from one of the coaches in Africa who I respect so much, Dr. Dumisani Magdalena. And he said, every person in Africa needs a mentor or a coach or somebody, a nudger, who helps to guide them in order to be the best version of themselves. In biblical circles, in churches, they call them destiny helpers. In secular circles, they may be called a mentor. But we all need somebody who sees in us more than we may see in ourselves and recognizes that we have that capacity and then pushes us to fulfill that capacity. And I'm so grateful that my journey has been blessed with these kinds of people.
So, Madupe, I was just thinking about your career development, if you will, and after West Point, um, well, let's stay there for a second. You did come back to Sierra Leone, right?
I did. I did. And I must confess it was against the advice of about 99% of the people who knew me and whom I knew. Because while I was at West Point, Sierra Leone fell into a civil war and
Right.
also there was a coup. So I was essentially the government that had, approved my departure was no longer in power, and I was informed that I would not be required to return. And because I had performed quite well at West Point, graduating in the top 10% of the class, I was even informed that if I wanted to, they could sort of find a way for me to stay in the U.S. and get a commitment in the U.S. Army. But I felt very strongly a sense of duty, which ironically was placed in me by West Point. And I felt that that sense of duty would never be fulfilled if I did not go back at a time when it wasn't convenient. And this is one of the things that I feel has been important to us in Africa, and frankly is peppered within my coaching, is that sense as leaders that we have to be leaders on days when we're in the mood and on days when we're not in the mood.
Yeah.
We have to do the right things at times when it appears to be to our advantage, and at times when it may appear to be the last thing that would serve our needs.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Sierra Leone, and yes, I served in the war, and I was actually shot twice during the war. So I almost paid for that decision with my life. But I want to say this, Magda, this is important. The investment of returning, the investment of sacrificing has paid off tenfold. The level of impact that I'm able to have, both in Sierra Leone and in Africa, because of the credibility that I gained by being someone who never ran off when the going got tough, is just amazingly huge. And there have been so many people that I've been able to impact, that I've been allowed to impact, because people know that this is someone that you can trust, because he won't back down, he won't cut up and run when the going gets tough, and you can entrust things to him. Whether it be secrets, whether it be resources, etc., because he's been proven. And that there is no way that I could have achieved what I have been blessed to achieve
if I had cut and run at that time.
Right. Well, that's a very powerful story, and I would not even call it cut and run, because of a change in the circumstances that would be quite legitimate. You could have stayed, right? But you chose otherwise. So wow, that's very powerful. And then you continued your education in the U.S. with Cornell, and then with Capella University. Yet you chose, maybe not yet, based on the story you just shared with us, it's not surprising, I guess, that you decided to go back to Sierra Leone and to really focus more on your country and the continent itself. So I presume, but I don't want to presume, it was a conscious choice. Get the education you can and apply it where it can be applied with great impact. Is that what you would say?
Indeed, it was a conscious choice. And I should, just to, so that folks listening or watching don't get confused, there were time gaps between each of the educational experiences. So after the bachelor, after West Point, I went back to Sierra Leone, served, and then, later on came back to do the master's, and then also worked, and then did the PhD and returned to Sierra Leone. And each time I worked outside of the United States. And after the PhD, around that time, one of the people who was, again, a mentor to me asked me a very simple coaching question. He was my coach, and he said, Modupe, what are you doing in the United States?
Good question.
I said, well, I knew what he meant, but I sort of played. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm raising a family. I've got a job. I'm doing good things. And he said, what are you really doing?
Mm.
And eventually I had to admit that I was simply marking time in preparation for something. And he said, how much longer do you need to prepare?
Another good coaching question, isn't it?
And and those kinds of questions and nudges helped me to take the courageous decision. And it is always a decision that requires courage, because so thank God that I had this person, again, different from my aunt, who, who nudged me in his own way to say, where is your true mission field? And I knew it was Africa. Now, there were 100 reasons I could give as to why. Should I go now? My children are small. I don't know Africa. What will happen? Will they accept me? But the reality is that we don't achieve our best selves when we allow the unknown to defeat our destiny. We achieve it when we move forward into the unknown, trusting in our vision, trusting in the universe to bring together all the various resources that are needed in order for our vision to come to pass. And that's the mark of good leadership. Is knowing and believing that your vision can come to pass even when you don't have the necessary resources under your control.
The African Leadership University?
Yes. So, through all of this, coming back to Africa, I was then connected with the African Leadership University and a number of amazing people who are doing amazing things. And those are the kinds of networks that I would never have known about if I had stayed where I was.
Mm-hmm. So the business school, was that your main focus with the African Leadership University?
It was. It was definitely the main focus. And the, you know, uh, on the heels of the success of the African Leadership Academy and then the African Leadership University, Fred Swanica recognized that there was a need for a Pan-African MBA program. And so he was looking for somebody who had a similar passion and vision and had the experience at running MBA programs,
Mm-hmm.
but also had an entrepreneurial spirit that would understand that simply taking what worked in Stanford, in Harvard, or elsewhere and planting it in Africa would not be ideal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I, at that time, had already done smaller versions of this, and I was looking for someone to partner with to really take it across the continent. So when we met, it was like just two magnets coming together, and I'm so blessed that as a result we're able to get something started that today has been just amazing, and
Yeah,
it's part of our legacy.
that's fantastic. And then, of course, came BCA leadership. So coaching, leadership development. How did coaching come to your life? Um, per se, I know that Auntie and everybody in West Point were probably partly coaches. However, where the idea of professional coaching as one of the tools and means for leadership development came to specific action of creating BCA.
Indeed, I got to experience coaching at a time when it wasn't even used as a word. And that
Mm-hmm.
was back in the mid 90s. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Nesland, who today I think is Professor Richard Nesland. I'm not even sure if he's still alive, but he came from the Denver, Colorado area, and he's very much celebrated as one of the sort of luminaries in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, he was, I guess, probably in his 40s or 50s, and we both met when we were working for a turnaround consulting company, a global turnaround consulting company called Integrated Control Systems. And one of the things that this company was known for was that we didn't just go into struggling companies and cut heads, but we actually engaged in retraining the leadership and the management.
Mm-hmm.
Our retraining of the leadership and the management, our one of the things that Richard was able to get us to adopt or get the company, I was just a trainee at the time, was to incorporate one-on-one follow-ups, is what he called it.
Mm-hmm.
And those one-on-one follow-ups that supplemented the group trainings, the methodology that he used was coaching. Now, I was just a trainee, but he found that I liked and I was quite good at facilitating training. And he took me under his wing and said, well, let me show you how to do these one-on-one follow-ups. And so it's from him that I learned about, the inquiry method, about, the grow method, about asking open-ended questions, about creating a safe space, all of those things. And so I actually started to do that
Mm-hmm.
when I didn't even know that there was such a word as coaching. So when I started my PhD program and, there was a coaching course as part of it, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that it was the thing that I had been doing and I had been taught and was just more formalized. And I was delighted. And, obviously, I knew it was beneficial and I did very well in that course. And since that time, it has been a huge part of my work and my philosophy for management and for leadership and for affecting other leaders.
Absolutely, absolutely. So clearly, you are focusing on the continent of Africa. You did say what works in Harvard and Stanford and somewhere else. It's not one size fits all. So, what do you think is very different about African market that you want to especially highlight with the work that you're doing there?
Let me highlight two things about, and leadership in Africa
Mm, mm,
that perhaps may not be intuitively obvious to somebody who doesn't understand Africa. You see, I, I've had the I've been very blessed and fortunate to lead in the United States, lead organizations, as well as in Europe and in Africa.
mm,
And when I was in Europe or the United States, and I lived there, I had a work circle. I also had a friend circle.
mm.
I also had what I would call a family circle
Sure.
and a, I would call it church circle or extra social. And the reality is that those four circles hardly ever intersected,
Mm,
except on maybe some rare occasions, like, if there was a baptism of my child or something like that. Now, as a result, when I made decisions in my workplace, they were relatively sanitized from the impact with my family, with my church, with my friends.
mm-hmm.
In Africa, for the vast majority of Africans, those four circles sit on top of each other.
Sure.
So, therefore, for a leader to make decisions at work or in the family or with church, the calculation about the impact of those decisions goes far deeper. And so when we look at leaders in Africa and we say, well, why do they make these decisions that don't seem to make sense? Sometimes it's because we're only looking at half of the picture that
Mm,
they have to factor. So that's one big aspect of leadership that really, when you're trying to support leaders, whether they be young leaders like entrepreneurs or they be experienced leaders like board members in their 50s and 60s, that's the other reason why coaching is so critical. Because until you earn the trust in a one-on-one relationship, for them to share some of those other aspects that are impacting their decision making, you will continually throw theory at them and wonder why they're not accepting it when it comes to the decision.
sure.
So that's one. The second side um, of leadership in Africa that I think is important and may not be easily recognized is the importance and the preeminence of culture on leadership decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There was Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I never understood how important that is until I came to Africa, where the decisions that are made will be aligned with the cultural behaviors much more consistently than they will be aligned with any rules, regulations, theories, or anything on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so interesting. We talk a lot in coaching spheres about cultural awareness, cultural um, acumen, and even for you being a native to Sierra Leone, it seems like there were some, maybe not surprises, but heightened awareness of what really is important and what drives people, decisions, and success in a continent. I see that we're coming to an end of our time, but Madupe, with all the work that you're doing, what's your wish? What's your wish for Africa?
My wish for Africa is that by 2040, Africa will be a high income continent, which means that the average African adult will certainly be able to generate sufficient value through their activities on a daily, weekly basis, that they will be able to afford a lifestyle that is, that allows for their children to have access to education, health, infrastructure, etc. But for that to happen, that means that every single African has to have access to their level of education and health and leadership coaching and mentoring that will help them to make good decisions. And that's not hard when you're trying to give it to 10 people or 100 people. The headache is how to get it to 500 million people.
And yet sounds like an absolutely phenomenal goal, aspirational for sure, but you and Dumi, you can do it, right? Dr. Dumisani often talks about Ubuntu principle, and about it is possible when we adopt, to your very points earlier, the way that makes sense for where the work is being implemented. So, Madupa, thank you so much for the work you're doing in Africa. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for the inspiration you shared with us. And again, I'm just thrilled to be in a cohort of coaching legends with you. And again, thank you so much for visiting with us.
Magda, thank you too. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. And I know this interview has been about me, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that you're doing an amazing work with ICF. So thank you for that. And by God's grace, all of these things will result in the kind of world that we all want to see.
Perfect closing. Nothing to add. Thanks so much. Thank you to our viewers, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Success in Africa podcast. In this episode, I've shared some of my success tips and how I got to be where I am, interviewed by the amazing CEO of the International Coaches Federation, Magda Mook. One of the things that I want to just highlight is the importance of mentors. In other circles, they may be called destiny helpers. We all got to where we are because of people who didn't owe us anything. In other words, they weren't our mother, they weren't our father, they were not our grandparents, but they saw something in us more than we saw in ourselves, and they said, I'm going to support, help, coach, mentor this person. And my encouragement to all of you is every African should be a mentor and be a mentee. Because no matter where you are, you need someone who's looking out for you, cares about you enough to tell you the truth and to push you past your comfort zone. And no matter where you are, there's somebody that you can also provide that same service. So please like, subscribe, share this video with others, because together we can transform our beloved continent. I'll see you next week.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.